When it comes to the most formidable enemies of the Greeks at the walls of Troy, many immediately think of Hector, the valiant defender of the city. But was he truly the embodiment of terror for the Achaeans? Today we will delve into the myths about Memnon, a warrior whose appearance on the battlefield instilled greater fear in the Greeks than the famous Trojan hero. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let's get started. The dust on the plain below Troy had finally settled. The body of Hector, the city's greatest defender, had been ransomed and burned. A heavy but relieved silence reigned in the Greek camp. The main enemy had been defeated. Victory seemed close, and the long 10 years of siege were about to come to an end. But one evening, as the sentries scanned the Dardanelles, they saw something strange. There were no ships on the horizon, but new columns of dust were rising from the east, from the land. This was not a Trojan sortie. It was the movement of an entire army. Rumors, at first as quiet as the rustling of grass, spread through the Achaean camp faster than a prairie fire. They spoke of a new ally of Troy, a king coming from the ends of the earth. His name was Memnon, and he was not a Trojan. This fact alone sowed alarm far deeper than the fear of a familiar enemy. Hector was understandable. He was the son of Priam, the defender of his home, a man whose motives, valor, and weaknesses the Greeks had studied for years. They knew his battle cry, his manner of holding his shield, the fury in his eyes. The battle with Hector was a difficult but predictable part of this war. Memnon, on the other hand, was a complete unknown. He was the king of Ethiopia, a land that the Greeks believed to be at the very edge of the inhabited world, where the sun god Helios began and ended his daily journey. This was not modern Ethiopia, but a mythical semi-divine kingdom in the east, inhabited by a people whose faces were believed to be scorched by the sun. To bring an army from so far away, across deserts and mountains, was a feat bordering on the impossible, and in itself spoke to the resources and will of this new enemy. His warriors were unlike the Trojans or their Lycian allies. They were strangers whose customs, language, and fighting techniques were a mystery to the Greeks. It was an invasion from another world into their protracted, almost routine war. Memnon was not just another king. He was the living embodiment of the distant and mysterious East, bringing with him a power that could not be measured by ordinary standards. But even more frightening than his earthly kingdom was his heavenly origin. If Hector was the best of mortal warriors, Memnon was a step above. He was the son of a goddess, and not just any nymph or minor deity. His mother was Eos, goddess of the dawn, one of the Titanides, sister of Helios, the sun, and Selene, the moon. Every morning, when her pink fingers parted the curtain of night, proclaiming the beginning of a new day, she reminded the whole world of her existence. She was an eternal, powerful force, part of the universe itself. And Memnon was her son by the mortal king Typhon. This connection made him not just a demigod, but a direct descendant of a cosmic primordial force. Royal blood flowed through Hector's veins, but Memnon's veins flowed with the blood of the first generation of gods. This divine lineage had very practical consequences. According to legend, Memnon's armor was forged by Hephaestus himself, the god of blacksmiths, the same craftsman who created the aegis for Zeus and the armor for the greatest of the Greeks, Achilles. This fact alone put Memnon on a par with Peleus. It was not just a high-quality weapon, it was a sign of divine protection, a symbol that its bearer was chosen. The Greeks, who fought in ordinary bronze cuirasses, now had to face a warrior clad in the creation of a god. The psychological effect was enormous. Every dawn, which had previously been a symbol of hope and a new day of battle for the Greeks, now took on an ominous tone. The rising sun was not just a luminary, but the gaze of a mother watching her son on the battlefield. Each ray of dawn, painting the sky in crimson tones, seemed to foreshadow the blood that her child would shed. The Greeks saw Memnon as more than just a man, albeit a very strong one. They saw him as a direct intervention by higher powers, an instrument of divine will directed against them. Hector was a problem that could be solved by force of arms. Memnon, however, was a metaphysical problem. How could one defeat someone whose mother lit the stars every morning and dispelled the darkness? It's like when an experienced team prepares for an important match after thoroughly studying their main opponent. They know their tactics, strengths, and weaknesses. And then, when the opponent's key player is out of the game, the team breathes a sigh of relief. But suddenly, a little-known rookie, about whom legends circulate, enters the field. They say he has a unique talent. He was trained by the best of the best, and no one knows what to expect from him. All previous confidence collapses, replaced by anxiety about the unknown. A familiar threat, no matter how strong, is always less frightening than one that cannot be predicted. In the Greek camp, weary of endless war, Hector's death was a watershed moment. It was not just a victory, it was a psychological turning point. For 10 years they had looked at the walls of Troy, and for all 10 years Hector had been their worst nightmare. The stronghold of the city, its living shield and striking sword. Now the shield was broken, the sword lay in the grave. Agamemnon was already mentally dividing Priam's treasures. Odysseus was calculating the final steps to the fall of the city, and the ordinary soldiers were dreaming of returning home. The relief was almost palpable, hanging in the air along with the smoke from the funeral pyres. And it was at this moment of fragile, hard-won peace that a new, far more irrational terror was born. Imagine a soldier who has spent months in the trenches studying the habits of a single sniper. He knows when he takes up his position, hears the distinctive sound of his bolt, almost guesses his thoughts. And now, after a long and bloody duel, the enemy is defeated. The soldier exhales. But the next night, a shot rings out from the other side, but the sound is completely different. The bullet flies along an unimaginable trajectory, piercing a shelter that was considered absolutely reliable. This is no longer just an enemy. It is a violation of the laws of physics, an invasion of something beyond the pale. The appearance of Memnon was such a shot. His army did not march in orderly phalanxes as the Greeks were accustomed to. It was a stream, colorful and chaotic at first glance, but driven by a single formidable will. Warriors with ebony-colored skin, in armor made of exotic animal skins and bronze, inlaid with ivory and gemstones. Their shields were not round Argive shields, but elongated, woven, yet surprisingly strong. In their hands were not only the usual spears and swords, but also curved blades, strangely shaped axes, and powerful bows whose strings seemed impossible for an ordinary man to draw. Their battle cries were guttural, like the roar of predators, and to Greek ears there was nothing human about them. This was not an army, it was a force of nature that had come from the ends of the earth to descend upon them. And at the head of this force rode he, Memnon. He did not shout, did not call his warriors to battle. He simply moved forward, and his silent majesty was more terrifying than any battle cry. His armor, forged by Hephaestus, did not simply glisten in the sun. It seemed to absorb the light, remaining coal-black, but with constellations twinkling on it, as if a piece of the night sky had been imprinted on it. It was not the shine of Achilles' polished bronze, but the deep, velvety darkness of space. The Greeks watching him from the walls of the camp felt cold sweat running down their backs. They saw before them not just a king. They saw the living embodiment of night, replacing the dawn, its mother. The first battle dispelled any remaining doubts. Memnon did not challenge the strongest to a duel, as was customary in the heroic age. He simply crashed into the ranks of the Achaeans, and his warriors followed him like a tsunami wave follows its crest. His movements were smooth and deadly. He did not waste his strength on unnecessary blows. Every swing of his sword found its target. Shields were split, helmets crushed like shells. And he did not kill furiously like Ajax or in a frenzy like Achilles. He killed with cold, almost detached skill, like a reaper cutting ears of corn in his field. It was in this first skirmish that the tragedy occurred which finally cemented Memnon's reputation as the most fearsome enemy. Old Nestor, the wisest of the Greek leaders, found himself in the thick of the battle. His chariot got stuck, and one of his horses was wounded. Death was inevitable. And then his beloved son, Antilochus, rushed to his father's aid. Young, brave, and swift as the wind, he was one of the best warriors of the new generation and a friend of Achilles himself. He managed to repel several attacks by the Ethiopians, giving his father time to retreat. And then he encountered Memnon. The duel was unseemly short. Antilochus struck with his spear, aiming at the unprotected throat, but Memnon easily parried it, without even turning his head, with a single movement of his shoulder. Then came the counterattack. It was not a spear or a sword. Memnon simply struck Antilochus with the edge of his huge shield. The blow was so powerful that the young man flew several meters, his chest literally crushed inward. He died instantly without uttering a sound. The entire Greek camp saw it. They saw how the greatest hope of Pylos, Achilles' friend, was killed not by a weapon, but by a simple, contemptuous movement. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. Hector killed the Greeks, but he did so in fair combat with all his strength. Memnon, however, killed one of their best warriors in passing, as if he were swatting an annoying fly. The cry of despair from old Nestor, who saw his son's death, rang out across the battlefield and froze in the hearts of every Achaean. At that moment they understood. Hector was a wall that could be broken through. Memnon was an abyss into which one could only fall. This episode had far-reaching consequences. It enraged Achilles. The death of Antilochus became a personal insult to him, almost as strong as the death of Patroclus. Now it was not just a war for Troy, it was a vendetta. But even in Achilles' anger, there was a shadow of respect mixed with fear. He understood that he was about to fight not a man, but his equal. Another son of a goddess, wearing armor made by the same master. A new horror seeped into the divine realm. The soothsayers in the Greek camp were in turmoil. Calchas, whose predictions had always been accurate, was silent. The omens he was accustomed to reading from the flight of birds and the entrails of sacrificial animals had become ambiguous and frightening. The birds flying from the east were of strange, unseen species. The smoke from the altars spread across the ground, unwilling to rise to Olympus. It seemed that the gods themselves were confused by the appearance of this new player. After all, it is one thing to support one side or another in a mortal war, as Athena, Hera, or Apollo did. It is quite another when a direct descendant of the Titans, the son of Dawn, enters the conflict. This violated the unspoken rules of the game. The gods of Olympus could patronize heroes, but they rarely interfered directly in each other's affairs. And now Eos, a force as ancient as the world itself, watched the battle every day, and her silent presence was felt by all. The morning light, which had once given hope, now seemed cold and hostile. It blinded the Greeks, but it lit up Memnon's figure, making his armor even blacker and his silhouette even more sinister. The dew on the grass, as the warriors whispered, was Eos' tears, which she shed in anguish for her son. The whole world, nature itself, seemed to be on his side. This mythological aura of fear was something Hector never had. Hector was understandable. He prayed to the same gods as the Greeks. He honored the same laws of hospitality and military honor. He loved his wife and son. He was an enemy, but he was part of their world, their civilization. Memnon, on the other hand, was an outsider. His motives were unclear. Why did the king of distant Ethiopia need to intervene in this war? Ancient sources say that he was Priam's nephew. His father Typhon was the brother of the Trojan king. But this family connection seemed too formal to explain such a large-scale invasion. It seemed to the Greeks that he had come not so much to help Troy as to enjoy the battle itself, to prove his superiority, to assert his will on this land. He was not a defender like Hector, but a conqueror at heart. And so the day of the decisive battle arrived. The two greatest warriors, Achilles and Memnon, met in the center of the plain. All other battles ceased. Even the gods on Olympus, according to legend, held their breath. It was not just a duel. It was a contest between two worlds, two destinies. On one side was Achilles, son of the sea goddess Thetis, the embodiment of Greek valor, fury, and tragic fate. On the other was Memnon, son of the goddess of dawn Eos, the personification of the mysterious East, superhuman strength and cosmic grandeur. Their mothers were not just watching at this moment. They went to Olympus and fell at Zeus' feet, each begging him to save her son. Zeus, the supreme god, found himself in a difficult position. He could not give clear preference to either side. And then he did what he always did at the most decisive moments. He took his golden scales of fate. He placed Achilles' lot, Car, on one side and Memnon's lot on the other. Slowly but surely, the side with Memnon's fate sank down to the realm of Hades. His fate was sealed. But even knowing this, gods and men watched the duel with bated breath. The battle was titanic. The blows of their swords struck sparks that were visible for many stadia. The clang of their armor was like thunder. They were equal. At one point, Memnon even began to press Achilles. His technique was flawless, his strength inexhaustible. The Greeks watching the battle grew cold. The thought that their invincible hero could fall seemed real for the first time. If Achilles fell, the war would be lost. It would be the end of everything. It was at this critical moment that Achilles, gathering all his strength and divine fury, delivered the decisive blow. He found a vulnerable spot under Memnon's chin and plunged his sword into his heart. The son of the dawn fell. But even his death was unlike that of an ordinary mortal, even a hero such as Hector. When Hector's body lay in the dust, it was a tragedy, but an earthly one. When Memnon fell, nature itself mourned him. The sky darkened, even though it was midday. His mother, Eos, descended from the heavens in a cloud of mist, picked up her son's body, and carried it to Ethiopia to bury it with due honors. She did not allow his enemies to desecrate his remains, as Achilles had done with Hector's body.
And then a miracle happened that forever inscribed Memnon's name in the annals of mythology. A flock of birds flew out of the hero's funeral pyre. They were named Memnonads. Dividing into two groups, they engaged in a fierce battle right above the grave, and many of them fell dead, sprinkling it with their blood. And since then, according to legend, every year on the day of Memnon's death, these birds fly to his tomb and repeat their deadly battle, bringing him a bloody sacrifice. Hector's death was the end of a man. Memnon's death was the beginning of an eternal myth, a natural cycle, an annual reminder of his greatness. Even after his death, he continued to inspire awe. His legacy was not in the city he saved, but in the very fabric of the world, in the morning dew, and in the annual battle of the mysterious birds. The Greeks defeated him physically, but his spirit, his legend, remained unconquered. And this irrational, mystical fear of something stronger than death proved to be much deeper than respect for the valor of the defeated Trojan prince. They feared Hector while he was alive. They feared Memnon even after he died. And this difference was felt not only in mystical awe, but also in the very prose of war, in tactics and strategy. Hector's army, consisting of Trojans and their Asia Minor allies, was a force that was understandable and, to some extent, predictable. They fought in dense formations, used chariots according to rules familiar to the Achaeans, and their commanders were known to the Greeks by name and reputation. War with them was like a brutal but regulated game of dice, where every throw could be deadly, but the rules were known to all. Memnon's army changed the very essence of the battlefield. The Ethiopians did not fight in a monolithic phalanx. They moved across the plain like a pack of predators, scattered, using the individual skills of each warrior. Their tactics were fluid and unpredictable. Where the Greeks expected to see a wall of shields, they encountered a scattering of deadly duelists who seeped through their ranks, striking from the flanks and rear. Their weapons were adapted for such combat. Lightweight but sturdy hippopotamus hide shields did not restrict movement. Short swords and heavy battle axes were ideal for close combat. And their archers, armed with huge palm bows, sent clouds of poison-tipped arrows, sowing death and panic even as they approached. Even the smells on the battlefield had changed. Instead of the familiar smell of sweat, horse tack, and spilled blood, new pungent aromas filled the air. Ethiopian warriors anointed their bodies with exotic oils and resins, which, according to rumors, not only protected their skin from the sun, but also gave them strength. For a Greek soldier accustomed to the harsh life of a 10-year siege, this was yet another sign of otherness, wealth, and primitive power that came from a world where the rules were completely different. Moreover, unlike Hector, whose motivation was crystal clear to defend his homeland, family, and honor, Memnon's motives remained a deep mystery to the Greeks. Yes, he was Priam's nephew, but this dynastic connection did not explain why a powerful king from the ends of the earth needed to lead his army into a foreign war, risking everything. The truth was much deeper and much more in keeping with the heroic age. Memnon came to Troy not so much for Priam's sake as for his own. He came for Kleos, eternal glory, which was the highest currency for any hero. In distant Ethiopia, rumors reached him of the greatest war of all time, of the deeds of Achilles, Ajax, and Diomedes. He, the son of a goddess who considered himself the greatest warrior among mortals, could not remain on the sidelines. Troy was not just a besieged city. It was the main stage of the world, an arena where gods and men decided the fate of generations.
Not to appear there would mean admitting that there was someone stronger than you. Memnon came to Troy to challenge Achilles. He did not come to save the city, but to prove his superiority in a duel with the one whom everyone called the best. This made him even more terrifying. Hector fought out of a sense of duty, and therein lay his humanity. Memnon fought out of pride, out of a divine ego, and this made him resemble an implacable force of nature. He did not defend, he asserted himself. And the Greeks instinctively sensed this difference. They were not just an obstacle on his path to saving Troy. They were props in his personal epic, extras who had to be removed from the stage to get to the main character. There was another aspect that ancient authors, particularly the poet Quintus Smyrnaeus, emphasized particularly strongly: Memnon's incredible, superhuman beauty. Homer describes the beauty of many heroes, such as Achilles or Paris, but in Memnon's case, it was something beyond the ordinary. He was described as the most beautiful warrior ever to set foot on Trojan soil. His features were perfect, like a statue carved by a god. His physique was ideal, and his dark eyes were said to reflect the light of the stars. This beauty created a terrifying dissonance. It is one thing to encounter an ugly cyclops or a rough giant. Their appearance matches their destructive power. But Memnon was the embodiment of harmony and perfection. And when that perfection brought death with cold efficiency, it shattered the usual perceptions of the world. His beauty was not a consolation, but a weapon. It paralyzed the will, inspired awe, and made his killings even more sacrilegious. It was as if the most beautiful work of art had suddenly come to life and begun to destroy everything around it. The Greeks saw him not just as an enemy, but as living proof that divine beauty and absolute lethality could be two sides of the same coin. It was a deeply disturbing, almost blasphemous sight. Achilles' anger was terrible but understandable. It was human rage taken to its extreme. Memnon's lethality was calm, detached, and therefore even more frightening, like a beautiful angel of death doing his job without anger or pity. Let us imagine for a moment an alternative scenario that undoubtedly crossed the minds of strategists like Odysseus. What if Memnon had arrived earlier? What if he had stood shoulder to shoulder with Hector? At first glance, this seems like a nightmare for the Greeks. Two of the greatest defenders, one the stronghold of the city, the other an unstoppable external force. But on closer inspection, this alliance could have been a curse rather than a salvation for Troy. Hector was a pragmatist, a strategist, a man of duty. His authority in Troy was unquestionable. Memnon, on the other hand, was the embodiment of absolute monarchy and divine right. He was not accustomed to obeying. An inevitable conflict for supremacy would have arisen. Two alpha males on the same battlefield. Could Hector, the defender of his home, accept that some foreign king, even if he was the son of a goddess, would dictate terms to him? And would Memnon, who had come for personal glory, follow Hector's defensive tactics instead of seeking a decisive battle with Achilles? Most likely their rivalry would have divided the Trojan army. Their different styles of warfare, Hector's methodical defense and Memnon's swift, aggressive raids, would have led to chaos in the command of the troops. Perhaps it was Hector's timely death, tragic for Troy, but fortunate for the Greeks, that allowed Memnon to shine so brightly, becoming the sole leader and last hope of the city. But his late arrival also meant that he came to a city already bled dry and deprived of its main symbol. Finally, Memnon's legacy went far beyond myth and took on a physical form that has captured people's imaginations for thousands of years.
In Thebes, Egypt, not far from the Valley of the Kings, stand two giant stone statues. These colossi, depicting Pharaoh Amenhotep Triton, were built around 1350 VC. In 27 VC, an earthquake damaged the northern colossi, after which it began to emit a strange sound at dawn. This was probably due to the evaporation of dew from cracks in the stone under the influence of the first rays of the sun. Greek and Roman travelers visiting Egypt heard this singing or moaning sound coming from the statue at dawn. Knowing the myth of Memnon, son of the goddess of dawn Eos, they immediately connected the two. They decided that this was the statue of Memnon, who greeted his mother, the dawn, in this way every morning. The Colossi of Memnon became one of the greatest tourist attractions of the ancient world. Roman emperors, including Septimius Severus, came here to hear this divine moan. Septimius Severus eventually ordered the statue to be repaired, after which, to everyone's disappointment, it fell silent forever. This historical curiosity is of great significance.
Hector remained a hero of epic poetry, a character in poems and tragedies. His tomb was shown in Troy, but it was a place of remembrance associated with literature. Memnon, thanks to this coincidence, stepped out of myth into the real, tangible world. He found his voice. Thousands of people over the centuries have heard him talk to his mother. This transformed him from a literary character into a living deity, a natural phenomenon confirmed by empirical experience. No other hero of the Trojan War has been accorded such an honor. His fear, his greatness were not just described in books, they were carved in stone and voiced by nature itself at dawn. And in this final, posthumous act, he surpassed Hector once again, proving that his connection to cosmic, divine forces was not just a poetic metaphor. The Greek camp was plunged into a state of cognitive dissonance.
For 10 years, their world had revolved around a single axis, the walls of Troy and Hector as their guarantor. Their entire military doctrine, all their hopes and fears, had been calibrated to this constant. They had learned to withstand his onslaught, anticipate his maneuvers, respect his valor, and hate his steadfastness. Hector's death was supposed to be the final chord, after which silence and denouement would follow. Instead, a deafening, dissonant gong sounded, heralding the beginning of a completely new, unknown opera. It was not just the introduction of a new enemy, it was the annulment of all their previous experience. All the sacrifices made to defeat Hector were suddenly devalued. Psychologically, it was as if a climber, having lost half his team and reached the summit of Everest, saw that behind it rose another, even higher and completely sheer cliff that was not on any map. The fatigue that had accumulated over a decade was compounded by the despair of realizing that the finish line was a mirage. This fear was exacerbated by the complete failure of Greek intelligence. Odysseus, the most cunning of the Achaeans, whose spies had penetrated Troy itself, knew nothing of the impending arrival of the Ethiopians. This meant that the world was much larger and more complex than they had imagined. In their minds, the Trojan War was the central event of the universe, a conflict between the greatest powers of the West and the East. The appearance of Memnon showed them that they were only participants in a local clash on the backwaters of a huge, unknown geopolitical chessboard. Troy was not just an isolated fortress city, but the western outpost of a whole network of eastern kingdoms, the power of which the Greeks had no idea about. Who else could come to Priam's aid? Perhaps warriors on elephants would appear from beyond the mountains of Bactria? Perhaps archers whose arrows carry fire would arrive from India?
Memnon had opened Pandora's box, and an irrational fear of the enemy's boundless resources poured out of it. War ceased to be a contest of valor and turned into a struggle against a hydra which grew a new, even more monstrous head in place of each one that was cut off. Even divine protection, which had seemed so clear, faltered. Thetis, Achilles' mother, was a powerful sea goddess, but her power was local, connected with the water element. She could hide her son in the depths of the sea, beg Hephaestus for armor for him, influence Poseidon. Her actions were dictated by maternal love. They were personal and understandable. Eos, however, was a force of a different order. She was not an Olympian goddess involved in intrigues and disputes. She was a titaness, part of the primordial cosmos. Her power was not limited to the sea or the mountains. It was all-encompassing and daily. Every dawn was her triumph over darkness. To oppose her son was to challenge the very order of the world, to try to stop the sun from rising. For a superstitious Greek warrior, this was unthinkable. Thetis could beg Zeus, but Eos was his equal in antiquity and power. This difference in the status of the divine mothers created the feeling that Achilles, for all his greatness, was the champion of one team, while Memnon was the son of the referee himself, who sets the rules of the game. On the battlefield, this difference manifested itself in details that made the blood run cold. Hector's warriors went into battle to the sounds of trumpets and lyres familiar to the Greeks. Their armor was made of the same bronze, and their shields were decorated with familiar symbols, a boar, a snake, a gorgon. Memnon's Ethiopians brought with them a different sound of war. Instead of piercing trumpets, they used low humming horns made of tusks and drums covered with crocodile skin, whose rhythm was uneven, hypnotic, like the beating of a primitive heart.
Their armor was decorated not only with metal, but also with the feathers of unseen birds, the teeth of predators, and the shells of giant turtles. They were not just warriors, they were priests of a foreign, chthonic cult of war. When a Greek killed a Trojan, he saw only an enemy before him. When he killed an Ethiopian, he seemed to be committing sacrilege, intruding on a foreign ritual he did not understand. The very air around Memnon's army was different, thick with the smell of musk, myrrh, and blood sacrificed to their dark gods. Memnon's visual legacy in Greek art also emphasizes his otherness. On ancient vases, especially those painted in black figure technique, he was often depicted as a dark-skinned warrior, contrasting sharply with the light-skinned figures of the Greeks. This technique was not merely an ethnographic detail, it was a powerful artistic symbol. Memnon was the visual embodiment of the other. His blackness against the background of light clay or white figures was not a skin color, but a metaphor for darkness, night, and the unknown that had come to engulf the light of Greek civilization. When an Athenian drank wine from a kylix, at the bottom of which Achilles pierced the black figure of Memnon with his spear, he saw not just a scene from a myth. He saw the triumph of order over chaos, of the familiar over the alien, of the self over the other. The very need to constantly reproduce this scene of victory spoke to how deep the trauma caused by his appearance was. Hector was also depicted, but as a worthy, understandable opponent. Memnon, on the other hand, was portrayed as an existential threat. The duel with Achilles was not just a clash between two heroes. It was a test of the strength of the entire Greek value system. Their main hero, the embodiment of the ideal of Kalokagathia, the unity of beauty and valor, faced an opponent who was no less, and according to some sources, even more beautiful and valiant.
But at the same time, a stranger. If Memnon had won, it would have meant more than just military defeat. It would have meant that somewhere out there, beyond the world they knew, there were heroes and civilizations that surpassed their own. It would have been a blow to the very foundation of their cultural identity. Therefore, the Greeks' fear during this duel was not only fear for their lives, but also fear for their world, for their place in the universe. Achilles' victory was necessary not only to take Troy, but also to confirm that their gods, their heroes, and their values were the only true ones. Even in death, Memnon deprived the Greeks of complete triumph. Hector's body remained with them. Achilles was able to quench his thirst for revenge by dragging him behind his chariot, desecrating him. It was an act of complete domination, an understandable and cruel ritual of war. With Memnon, this ritual was impossible. His divine mother did not allow mortals to dispose of her son's body. She enveloped it in mist and carried it away, depriving Achilles of the main reward of the victor, the body of the enemy. The Greeks could neither desecrate it nor hold a lavish funeral in respect, as they might have done with another noble opponent. Memnon simply disappeared,
dissolved, returned to the world of gods and myths from whence he came. He left nothing material behind, no body, no trophy armor that could be hung in a temple. He left behind only a legend, a void on the battlefield, and the eternal question, what if? This incompleteness, this inability to complete the ritual of victory, made his figure even more powerful and disturbing in the memory of the Greeks. He left truly undefeated, for his essence proved beyond their control. Memnon, although not a Trojan by origin, became the embodiment of the Greeks' worst nightmare, thanks to his divine status, unexpected appearance, and strength almost equal to that of Achilles.
His story reminds us that in war, fear often arises from the unknown and the supernatural, surpassing even the threat posed by familiar heroes such as Hector. Thank you for learning these mythological secrets. Perhaps they will make you look at the legends of Troy in a new light.